You've gotten good at looking fine. Nobody's asked if you actually are. The smile comes out easy now, almost automatic. Like a reflex you stopped noticing years ago, but underneath it, there's a weight that never really left. It sits somewhere behind your ribs, quiet, heavy, patient. You laugh at the right moments. You answer, "I'm good," without thinking twice. And still, something in you feels like it's carrying more than it's letting on. That gap between the face you show and the weight you carry never really closes. And you're not the only one who's felt this gap. Buddhism has been looking at exactly this split for over 2,000 years. What it noticed about the space between your face and your feelings might change how you carry both. That's what we're sitting with today. And you felt this. That specific moment when someone asks how you're doing, and the answer comes out before you even think about it. It's not a lie. Exactly. You are functioning. You are getting through the day. But functioning and feeling okay are two completely different things. Somewhere along the way, you stopped separating them. Buddhism has a word for this quiet discomfort that sits underneath an otherwise normal day. It's called Dukkha. It doesn't mean disaster or tragedy. It means the small, constant unease of things never quite fitting the way you want them to. Your smile fits the moment. It doesn't fit what's happening inside you. That mismatch, repeated enough times, becomes its own kind of tired. Notice how this shows up across a single, ordinary day. In the morning, you check your phone, see 3 messages that need answers, and smile at the pressure instead of naming it. At work, someone asks if you're okay with the extra task, and you say yes before you've actually checked whether you are. At dinner, a friend mentions how easygoing you've always been, and you take it as a compliment, even though some part of you wants to correct them. By the time you're home, alone, the smile finally drops, and what's left underneath? It is the same weight that's been there the entire day, just no longer covered by anything. That gap between the public version of you and the private one isn't a one-time event. It's a full-time job you never applied for and never get paid for either. Even weekends don't fully switch it off. You might rest your body on a Saturday, but the habit of managing your face rarely takes the day off with you. Someone asks what you've been up to, and the easy version of the answer comes out again, smoothed over, pleasant, slightly untrue. It's not that you're incapable of rest, it's that the performance has become so constant. It doesn't recognize weekends as different from weekdays. The weight doesn't clock out just because you did. Think about how many times today you adjusted your face before anyone saw you. You straightened your shoulders. You softened your expression. You got ready to perform ease you didn't actually feel. You don't do this because you're fake. You do it because somewhere you learned that heaviness makes people uncomfortable. Ease makes things easier for everyone, including you. But here's what that costs. Every time you smile over the weight instead of through it, the weight doesn't go anywhere. It just waits under the surface for the next quiet moment, waiting to remind you it's still there. There's a teaching attributed to the Buddha that fits this exactly. He said, "Pain is certain, but suffering is what we add to it ourselves. The heaviness you feel is real, but the performance on top of it, the constant managing of how it looks, that's the part you're adding. That's the part that's optional. Apply that to what you're carrying right now. The heaviness itself, whatever caused it, is the pain. It arrived the way pain always arrives, uninvited, and mostly outside your control. But the constant monitoring of your own face, the calculating of how much to let show, the quiet exhaustion of managing an image around it, that's the second layer. That layer isn't the original wound. It's the effort spent making sure nobody sees the wound. An effort like that never comes free. You've likely been treating both layers as if they were one single problem, which makes the whole thing feel heavier than it needs to. Separating them doesn't remove the pain, but it does mean you stop paying twice for something that only cost once to begin with. You didn't choose to feel tired underneath a normal day, but you did learn. somewhere, that's showing it wasn't safe. Maybe it was a room where being sad got you fixed instead of heard. Maybe it was a version of you that got called dramatic once and never forgot it. Either way, you built a habit out of it. Smile first, feel later, and hope nobody looks too closely in between. It's worth sitting with where a habit like this actually starts. Nobody decides one day, out loud, to start hiding how they feel. It usually forms in small, unremarkable moments that add up, without you noticing the pattern forming. A time you cried and someone changed the subject, instead of staying with you in it. A time you said you were struggling and got advice instead of company. A time you were the only steady person in a room full of chaos, and steady became the role you got assigned from then on. None of these moments were dramatic enough to remember clearly, but your nervous system remembered them anyway, and it drew a quiet conclusion from all of them combined. The conclusion was something like this: showing the weight costs more than hiding it does. That conclusion made sense at the time, given what you had to work with. It might not make sense anymore, but habits don't check whether they still make sense before they keep running. They just keep running, the same way they always have, until something interrupts them on purpose. There's also a simpler reason this pattern feels safe, and it deserves to be said plainly. As long as you look fine, nobody has to do anything about how you actually feel. Not because people around you don't care, but because most people are relieved when they don't have to sit with someone else's heaviness, and you learn to give them that relief automatically. You became easy to be around by making sure your hardest moments stayed invisible. That's not a flaw in your character. That's a skill you built carefully over years, because at some point it was the skill that kept things running smoothly. The problem isn't that you built it. The problem is that it's still running on autopilot, long after the situation that required it has changed. If this is landing for you, there's more of this on the channel. Subscribe so you don't miss it, because here's the part that's easy to miss. This isn't just about hiding sadness. It's about hiding anything that doesn't fit the version of you that people expect to see. Frustration gets folded into a laugh. Exhaustion gets folded into busy. Loneliness gets folded into fine, just tired. Each fold takes a small amount of effort. Multiply that by every conversation, every day, every week, and the effort adds up to something enormous. And that's where it gets harder, because the folding doesn't stay contained to conversations with other people. Eventually, you start folding things away from yourself too. You stop checking in on how you actually feel, not because you don't care, but because checking in means facing something you've gotten very good at avoiding. Buddhism talks about this avoidance in terms of attachment, but not attachment to things. Attachment to an image of yourself, the version that's easygoing, that's low maintenance, that doesn't need anything from anyone. That image gets comfortable to live inside of. It gets you through rooms without friction. But holding an image takes muscle, and muscle gets tired eventually. Think about the specific version of yourself that gets the most compliments. Maybe it's the one who never complains. Maybe it's the one who's always available. Always upbeat, always the steady one in the room while everyone else falls apart a little. That version gets praised constantly, and the praise feels good. So you keep building the image bigger. But nobody praises the version of you that's tired and unsure and doesn't have it together today. So that version gets quieter and quieter until it stops showing up in rooms at all, even the rooms where it would be safe to. The image you built to be liked has slowly started replacing the person you actually are, and the replacement happens so gradually you almost didn't notice it happening. Somewhere in there, the two versions stopped feeling like two versions at all. They started feeling like one person, the only person, with no other option available. That's how completely a habit can take over, when nothing interrupts it for long enough. You know this feeling. You've been here before, at the end of a long day, wondering why you're exhausted when nothing happened. Nothing happened is exactly the problem. You spent the whole day managing an appearance instead of living inside your actual experience. That kind of tired doesn't show up on any list of things you did, but your body knows the difference, even when your calendar doesn't. Here's a question worth sitting with. What would today have looked like if you hadn't performed ease at any point in it? Not dramatically different, necessarily. Just a version where your face matched what was actually happening underneath it. Where tired looked tired. Where flat looked flat. Where the weight in your chest got to exist in the open instead of behind a practiced expression. Most people flinch at that question, and that flinch tells you something important. It tells you how much energy goes into the gap between the inside and the outside. It tells you how normal it's become to treat your real state as something to manage, rather than something to simply have. Something is shifting in how you understand this. You're starting to notice how automatic the performance has become. Noticing it is the first place anything changes. Not because noticing fixes it instantly, but because you can't loosen the grip you don't know you're holding. There's a second teaching worth bringing in here. The Buddha described the mind as something that returns again and again to what it clings to, the way water returns to the lowest point in a valley. Your smile has become a low point. It's the groove your face falls into by default, the place it goes without being told to. That's not a character flaw. That's just what happens when a pattern gets repeated enough times. Grooves form. Water follows them. But grooves can be redirected, not through force, and not through deciding one day to just stop smiling when you don't mean it. That approach usually backfires, because it turns your face into another performance, just a different one. The redirection Buddhism points toward is quieter than that. It starts with simply noticing the gap in the moment it happens, not judging it, not fixing it, just noticing. There's a gap here. This is worth being specific about, because it's easy to misunderstand as another form of self-improvement. It isn't. You're not trying to become someone who never smiles unless they mean it, as some kind of new standard to hold yourself to. That would just be a different performance, dressed up as authenticity instead of ease. The actual shift is much smaller and much quieter than that. It's simply catching the moment the groove pulls your face somewhere your feelings haven't actually gone yet. And in that single moment, you choose to let your expression lag half a second behind the automatic response. Half a second of honesty is enough. It doesn't need to become a whole new personality. It just needs to happen often enough that the groove stops being the only path available. That noticing changes something without forcing anything. It puts a small amount of honesty back into a moment that would otherwise run on autopilot. Over time, those small moments of honesty add up the same way the folded moments used to. Except this time they're adding up towards something lighter instead of something heavier. You might be wondering where the heaviness even came from in the first place. That's a fair question, and it doesn't always have a clean answer. Sometimes it's grief that never fully found somewhere to land. Sometimes it's disappointment you decided wasn't worth mentioning out loud. Sometimes it's simply the accumulated weight of being responsible for too many people's comfort for too long. Whatever the source, the pattern that formed around it works the same way. Smile over it. Move past it. Keep the day running smoothly for everyone watching. And the day does run smoothly, on the surface. But smooth on the surface and light underneath are not the same thing, and you already know that. But here's what nobody tells you about this. The heaviness isn't actually asking to be removed, it's asking to be acknowledged. Those are two very different requests, and most people spend years trying to answer the wrong one. You can't think your way out of a feeling that only wanted to be seen in the first place. You can only make room for it, and rooms don't require solutions. They just require space. Making room looks smaller than people expect. It might look like naming the tiredness out loud to yourself, once, honestly, without performing it for anyone else. It might look like letting your face rest into whatever it actually feels like resting into, for just a few seconds, when no one's watching. It might look like answering, "How are you?" with something slightly closer to the truth, even if it's still small. None of these require you to fall apart in public. They just require you to stop performing so completely in private. Picture the next time someone close to you asks how your week has been. You don't have to unload everything onto them. You could simply say, "Honestly, it's been heavier than usual." And let the sentence stand there without immediately softening it with a joke. Watch what happens in your own chest when you do that. There's usually a flicker of fear, the old instinct that says this will make things worse somehow, but nothing collapses. The conversation usually just continues, a little more honest than it was a moment ago. That's the entire practice. Not a program, not a technique with 5 steps, just one slightly truer sentence, repeated in small moments, until truer sentences start to feel less dangerous than they used to. You can also practice this alone, before it ever reaches another person. At the end of a day, instead of telling yourself, "It was fine," try naming what actually happened underneath the fine. "It was heavy today, and I smiled through most of it anyway." That sentence doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need to be shared or explained or turned into a story. It just needs to be true. Spoken quietly, to the one person who's been managing the performance all along, which is you. The heaviness you carry doesn't disappear the moment you acknowledge it. That's not how any of this works, and any promise that it does is worth being suspicious of. What changes is your relationship to it. It stops being something you're hiding from and starts being something you're simply holding. Holding something honestly is lighter than hiding something constantly, even when the weight itself hasn't changed at all. There's a distinction worth making clearly here, because it changes how you hear everything that's come before it. A performed smile and a genuine one aren't just different in feeling, they're different in cost. A genuine smile doesn't drain you, because it's simply matching something that's already happening inside you. A performed one drains you constantly, because it's holding a shape your inside isn't actually in. You can usually tell the difference afterward by how tired you feel, even though nothing physically demanding happened. That tiredness is data. It's telling you how much of the day you spent managing appearances instead of simply existing inside your own experience. None of this means you have to stop smiling at people, or stop being kind, or stop being the person others feel comfortable around. Ease and honesty aren't opposites. You can still be warm, you can still make people feel comfortable. The difference is doing it from a place that isn't constantly covering something up underneath it. Warmth that comes from an honest place doesn't exhaust you the same way. It might even be the first version of warmth you've offered people in a long time, that didn't cost you something to give. And that's the thing about all of this. The smile was never really the problem. The problem was the distance it created between what you showed and what you carried. Closing that distance, even slightly, even privately, changes what the rest of the day feels like to live inside of. There's one more layer to this worth naming before we close, because it touches the people around you as much as it touches you. The people closest to you are close to the version of you that smiles through things. They laugh with that version, plan with that version, rely on that version to stay steady when things get hard. Which means, in a strange way, even the closest relationships in your life can end up built around someone slightly incomplete. Not because anyone's being deceived on purpose, but because the fullest version of you hasn't had many chances to actually show up in the room. That can create a specific kind of loneliness, the kind that doesn't make sense from the outside, because you're surrounded by people who genuinely care about you. But caring about a performance and knowing a person are two different experiences, and only one of them actually closes distance. This is usually why letting the weight show, even slightly, changes relationships in ways that surprise people. Not because anyone was waiting for you to fall apart, but because most people, when given the chance, would rather know you fully than keep admiring a version of you that's easier to be around. You just have to test that in small amounts to find out it's true. The first time usually feels like a risk. It rarely turns out to be one. You don't have to announce the heaviness to everyone around you. You don't have to explain it, defend it or fix it on any particular schedule. You just have to stop asking your face to lie about it quite so completely. That's a small shift. It doesn't look like much from the outside, but it's the difference between carrying weight and being crushed by it. None of this asks you to abandon the parts of yourself that hold things together for other people. That instinct isn't wrong, and it's often kind. What it's asking is simpler than that. Let the holding together include yourself too, not just everyone standing around you. You've spent a long time making sure other people had somewhere steady to land. It might be time to build that same steadiness somewhere on the inside, where nobody else can see it, but you can finally feel it. If there's one thing worth taking from today, let it be this. The version of you that looks fine and the version of you that feels heavy are not enemies. They're both just you on the same day, in the same body. You don't need one to defeat the other. You just need enough honesty between them that neither one has to carry the whole load alone. If this is what it feels like when the weight hides behind a smile, there's another side to this too. The part where the mind won't stop circling the same thought all night instead of ever going quiet. That's a different kind of heavy, and it's worth looking at too. You don't need to fix the weight today, or explain it, or resolve it into some tidy lesson. You just need to let it exist, quietly, alongside the parts of you that still smile, still show up, still get through the day. Both can be true at once. They always have been. This channel exists to help you see what's actually happening inside your mind. If that's what you're looking for, subscribe.